All right, welcome to a brand new module, and our focus over the next couple lessons will be merging, joining, and concatenating data frames together. So basically the big picture here is how we work with multiple data frames side by side with each other. How do we merge them? How do we combine them? How do we concatenate them? How do we identify unique values in one but not the other? How do we identify values that are shared in both? Any kind of typical joining operations, if you have experience, for example, in SQL or even something like VLOOKUP operations in Excel, those kinds of operations of combining data from two different sources into one central one is really the focus of this module. So we're going to be utilizing actually a total of 5 CSVs throughout this module. They're all related to one central topic. So if I scroll down here, I'm going to highlight these 5 restaurant CSVs. So these are just 5 CSVs related to our fictional restaurant, and they have information on our food items, the customers who come into our restaurant, our sales over the course of 2 weeks, as well as satisfaction. So we may not be utilizing every single CSV in every single lesson. Sometimes I may use 2, sometimes I may use 3, but all of these kind of form, you can think of them as different data sources, different pieces of our data collection, and now we're going to have to combine them and make some sense out of the data here. So let's begin by creating a new Jupyter notebook. I'm going to click the new button and select my Conda root environment. And let's call this notebook Merging, Joining, and Concatenating. Let's of course import the pandas library as PD. Let's create some cells below with the B button. And in this lesson I'll just conclude by showing you the data sets that we're working with. In fact, I'll probably only introduce 4 out of 5 because the last one won't really come into use until we get to the very end of this module. So let's take a look at our very first CSV. I'm going to call the read CSV method. I'm going to type in the word restaurant here and press tab, and here we have all of our related CSVs. The first point, or the first one I'd like to introduce, is week 1 sales. So I'm going to load that, press Shift Enter to execute, and it's a fairly simple data frame. If I scroll down here, we'll see that we have 250 rows of data and 2 columns, and basically it's pretty simple. We have a customer ID column and a food ID column. So the customer ID column is basically an identifier that's given to every customer that walks into our restaurant and buys an item, and the food ID is the numeric representation of what item they bought on the menu. So basically it's just a combination of who came in and bought something and what they bought, and this represents 1 week of sales for our restaurant. So what I'm going to do is assign this to a variable called week 1, and I'm also going to load the next data frame. So I'm going to use read CSV and do restaurant, and now do week 2 sales. And what we'll see here is that it's basically the exact same thing structurally. It's just another week of sales. So another data frame of 2 columns and 250 rows of 250 customers who came in and what ID they have and what food item they purchased on our menu. Keep in mind the same customer may have come in on week 1 and week 2. Keep in mind that the same customer may have came in on the same week and bought different items at different times throughout the week. So this is just kind of the representation of sales across 2 different weeks in 2 different CSVs. So I'm going to store this one in week 2. So finally, the question that you may be asking is, well, what do these numbers represent? What is that customer ID and what is that food ID? Well, the last 2 CSVs in our collection is where all of that data comes together. So if I do pd.read CSV and I take a look at our customers CSV, keep in mind these numbers here that appear under customer ID. These are each tied to a customer, and those customers are represented in our customer CSV. So here we have an ID column here that represents the customer ID that we just saw in the week 1 and week 2 sales documents. And here we have information about that customer, their name, their gender, the company they work for, and their job title. So obviously, as you can probably imagine, one of the lessons here will be focused on how we can merge these 2 data sets together by essentially taking these values and matching them back to our sales based on the common customer ID. So I'm going to store the customer CSV in a variable called customers. And predictably, if I do pd.read CSV and take a look at our foods CSV, that's a very small CSV that basically ties together that food ID that the customer purchased along with information about what that actual item is. So here we have the item itself and the price in our restaurant. So we can use it to tie together which customers bought what foods and what those foods exactly were. So I'm going to store this in a variable called foods. And so we're going to import these 4 CSVs and store them in 4 separate variables, and this will be our import code at the beginning of every lesson within this module. So I hope you're excited to dive into these operations. These are very popular Pandas operations and kind of start going into the functionalities of Pandas that are very common across many other data analysis toolkits. Of course, when anybody talks about SQL, they're usually talking about things like inner joins and outer joins, and all of these things are possible in Pandas. So a lot of that knowledge is critical to know here. So this module is focused dedicated specifically to those kinds of merging, joining, and concatenating operations. So I looking forward to another exciting module, and I will see you in the next lesson where we'll dive into the PD concat method, which can be used to combine data frames together.